To paraphrase my presentation, we're going to talk to you a little bit about taking APIs from the sort of the back room to the boardroom. And this is really important because, as will become hopefully apparent through the conversation that we're going to have, is that there are a lot of challenges around introducing technology into the higher echelons of a business. And fundamentally, it's run around context and simplifying the reality of what can be sometimes very complex technology solutions. It's also very important that there's a language and a taxonomy that goes with APIs and with technology specifically, and that can get lost effectively into the boardroom, and certainly as you go up. And when you're communicating with a C-suite or a board level, they're very time poor, so we have to be very simple and condensing things. But if you've listened to many of the conversations today, this is not around setting some API strategy for a business. This is about educating, and really what I want to do is to try and get away and for you to take away that we can, between us all, encourage boardrooms to understand how connected and accessible their businesses need to be, and what role APIs effectively play in that. So just a little bit around me. For a banking and embedded finance conference, I come from a slightly different side of the finance sector. I work in insurance, which is interesting because it's a very cautious, conservative, risk-adverse industry, and as a result of that, trying to push through change, technology change, is challenging. But nevertheless, that's the space where I've found myself. I went many years ago to a different conference and found a sort of a description for being purple resources, and those purple resources in an organization are those that sit between the sort of blue of business and the red of IT, and they're coming together, and that's where I've sat, so sort of translator bridge. But more specifically to APIs, I've sat as a sort of solution architect, a user, a buyer of technology and platforms, but I've also listened slightly from afar from the way that APIs have been spoken about and communicated to audiences. And the reason this presentation is, I hope, going to resonate is that as technology moves from just being little huddles and forums between developers and communities, and it moves up to business practitioners starting to pay attention, and then it moves up another level to where you get some of your executives regurgitating acronyms they've heard. You know that there is two things that are going to happen. It's going to be a challenge, or it's going to actually start to change the narrative and build some momentum in a business. But fundamentally, when technology acronyms, as APIs have been, and certainly still remains to a degree in insurance, but past in banking, arguably, that's the conversation and the transition that I see. And it's a very different mindset and language that we need to use. So, interesting, I'm going to talk about context, but what has B's got to do with anything to do with a conversation today? But as you would expect, try and produce a presentation. What we're looking to do is to try and find some imagery that's interesting and emotive. But so when you search for APIs, trying to get some pictures, you quickly go through API, API Day, API Days, and then you can land actually on Apiday, which I didn't know anything about, but it transpires to be a family of bees. And so the important point there is it doesn't take much to actually be completely shifted off of the compass point when you're trying to educate other people around technology before you can actually be in a world of quite a lot of pain. So I'm going to talk about context. Context is very important. But the reality is that, what I should say is I have a lot of knowledge about very little things around technology. I have not a clue what any of this actually means. I've architected solutions, and I've had other people that have got round into the detail of coding and delivering user experiences. So, but what I do understand is, of course, that when you're talking to the business, you will need to talk about it into the context of the user and engagement, and we stay away from code and solutionizing. So, and the challenge with taking specifically APIs, and again, this is a talk about the financial services holistically, is that technologists have a tendency to get into detail pretty quickly, and board levels tend to avoid detail as much as they can. So we have to manage that. So what we're looking at is effectively moving from code to context. That's the important thing when we're trying to take a capability such as APIs and trying to extract some and get some understanding into a C-suite or a boardroom. And so the context around APIs and its supporting architecture and resources and getting that understood about what's really involved and important at the top table. And getting use cases and functions and the context, as I said, is very important there. So this is very important, of course, that not all boards are created equal. So the variety of committees, organizational levels that one might be trying to educate. And as was mentioned at the very first session with Simon, his point 3 was, educating leaders into the art of the possible. That's principally what I'm building on. So not all boards are created equal, and so we have to understand and read the room a little bit. And we're not looking to, clearly embarrass anybody about their lack of understanding, but it's that lack of understanding that we have to address. And there are ways to do that, which I'll come on to. There are many flavors now of what was the old IT director, CTOs, digital officers, CIOs, heads of change and strategy. So they all come into the boardroom with their different skill sets. But actually, one of the sort of prerequisites maybe for going forward is making complex things simple is not necessarily always the domain or the capability of many that are responsible for technology, because they invariably come from being interested in code and cables and plugs and the rest. So, but making complex things simple is what we need to do. But how do you get a boardroom, a group, a collective, whichever that is, to move from this sort of regulatory operational pressures to start to understand some of the power of event-driven activities and the capabilities, and dare I say, even trying to understand and look at their business in a slightly different way. So how do we get application, APIs, into a boardroom? Well, there are two ways, and it won't be a surprise, I'm sure, to many of you. The first way is the top-down. So this is well described here, is that clearly the reality of some of our lives is that they drift down. It's a reading, it's a conversation, it's a golf club, it's something else. And they drift into the business, into the room, and it can be very challenging, not least of which because there's no context, there's not much understanding of the detail. But that's the reality of the top-down approach, and that's where the technology in the room, the technologist, has to sort of react and respond to that. And just to be clear, in terms of the Dilbert cartoon, I took out blockchain and replaced it with APIs because that was clearly pertinent. But the reality is it could have been quantum computing, could have been blockchain, it could have been anything else. It's the same principle. But there is another way, which is the more prevalent, and this is, of course, the educating up way, which is where we're taking something new into a group, an executive. And often when you're in a room like that, you're looking to try and inform, educate, and generally get an agreement to move on. But that has its challenges too. And again, a little bit of creative license here. And trying to get an understanding and a clarity and effectively raising the education bar is a challenge. Now, one of the extra things around APIs as a holistic thing is that they obviously operate predominantly under the waterline. So they are hidden, obscure, and a long, long way away from the day-to-day world of the executives or the boardroom as they look at the business. And we have to change that. And by doing, we have to change the narrative. And examples are obviously a great way, analogy and the like. And examples in different industries are useful. But there is that's a double-edged sword as well, because where, again, Simon in the first presentation was looking at this 7 trillion opportunity of embedded insurance and recognizing Alipay as a sort of a totem to that. Clearly, in many boardrooms, none of them would recognize Alipay as a business that they recognize, relate to, or truly understand. But nevertheless, we have to understand some narrative. And Coca-Cola, in their vending example of the way they rolled out APIs and the flywheel that actually came from that with other sectors of Coca-Cola and other parts of the business, can actually become possibly a more relevant and practical example. But the reality is, how do we overcome the challenge? And so what are some of the headwinds for making sense of what is effectively lots of little bits and pieces that, when joined together, actually create something of value? So technology and its advancements can challenge a boardroom because generally they are quite specialized. They need a lot of skills. And they're not, as I said already, using this waterline concept, they're not particularly visible to anybody. So there's that challenge. They don't currently, unless you're deference to banks and some other financial services organizations, they're not really strategic and seen strategically. Clearly, there's a lack of understanding. We've covered that already. But really, there is this other force at play, which is around actually a misunderstanding of how connected businesses are, both in a supply chain that's understood in terms of the manufacturing line, but now in a digital sense as well. And that's one thing I think is worth amplifying, really. And then you come on to the fact about data and security. And the last bit around one of the major headwinds, of course, is that within the context of a business, that most are not technology businesses. APIs are not seen as an asset or intrinsically valuable. They're seen as potentially a utility. So how do we shift the needle of seeing APIs in a business from being utilities to being something that actually enables some transformational factors? Now, again, I come from the insurance industry, and if you said, to someone in an IT department or a digital end of an insurance business that there was a challenge around APIs, they would contest that. APIs are consumed and used extensively within the insurance world, but they're not used they're used internally as a function more than a product or an asset. So we have to realign that and understand to get. Hang on, there we go. So we have to realign that to start to talk about what APIs actually deliver you. The classic solution selling around the benefits. We talk about the fact that APIs will start to give a business agility. Relationships, partnerships, and the like will become stickier by the fact that we're actually already connected at both a contractual operational level as well as a digital data level. And whilst the number of APIs is growing almost exponentially, it does enable, for those that take the right attitude, to start to look at opportunities and building out value propositions, and we'll come onto that more, which is a straight line to growth, which is actually something that boardrooms absolutely care about. So the reality about acceleration and getting to new business models is a word that boards like to think they understand, but probably should, is of course around leverage. So the beauty of actually operating and having a bunch of APIs that you both use internally but actually promote publicly is that they start to give you leverage, and leverage starts to give you the opportunity to build propositions, and propositions enable you to scale, which is again something that a board would relate to. But there is a challenge to shifting this needle, which is back to the context. And the need to try and bring this to life is paramount. And so pictures, clearly, are important. Boards tend to understand numbers, but they have to be the right numbers, and so on. So the final thing, which is effectively, there'll be sessions here, there's conferences all around it about the benefits and the opportunities around the network effect. So that's really important for trying to articulate and identify the value that having a cohesive API strategy for a business, but more so understanding that the people around the top table get enough around APIs to start to make some sensible decisions, is this understanding that it would promote the network effect. So it actually enables your business to grow, arguably exponentially. And with it enables you, it enables you to talk about ecosystems, which is, again, something I'm going to just gloss over because there's enough content out there and again, a subject for a conference all on its own. But to understand at the board level the importance of your connections and the partnerships that you hold, and the ability to grow trusted and affiliated joint ventures, strategic alignments, and product building propositions in whatever your product or service is. But we're going to go straight into talking about context. So APIs, we're talking about, as it says, it can help them drive growth, but you have to talk in terms of the narrative that we spoke about. We're talking about, for a board level, we're connecting businesses, connecting people, and connecting things that enable us to see our business in a different way. Generally, boards are interested in reducing risk and whilst delivering some growth, and that is fine, but it takes it away from the opportunities that technologies and putting API in that bundle deliver. We have to look at building foundations that enable us to start to develop our own APIs and make them publicly available in a way that we start to look at our business as being adaptable and almost looking at the business in a sort of a containerized way, dare I say, so that actually we're looking at modules of functions, all self-contained, that can be swapped out and swapped in. And this narrative, this conversation starts to bring these two things together. The final thing, of course, is to try and to establish the context, is to fundamentally see the technology as an asset. Okay. So building on that, and building on some of the previous conversations, we're looking at maybe using APIs as a metaphor for the modern business. Now, again, I'm not going to suggest that I'm any shape or form a microservices expert, but there's clearly some best practices around delivering microservices that is well documented. What's interesting is when you start to take a step back, those characteristics represent best practice for maybe a business going forward. So we look at, and it can be like focusing on users, as already spoken to about Chris, asking them what they want. So we're looking about customer centricity. That's very important. We can start to see a direct line of correlation between those two things. We always spoke about partnerships. That's very important, both from a trading perspective, but in an extended world. So then, again, Chris was talking about it and others have spoken about this needs to start to think about your business in a mode of continuous improvement, and clearly technology and the way that products are developed, tested, iterated, adopted is with a speed and almost without pause and reflection. It's just like we just need to keep moving forward. That's the most important thing. Well, that is very important to businesses, not clearly maybe some international or national security, but nevertheless, a normal business needs to start to continuously improve. And then finally, we're actually getting into a point of actually talking about being highly analytical, and as a result of the data that APIs can deliver to the business, and in the way that's presented, we can start to build out some new propositions. And in essence, in the sort of the old adage of if you can't manage what you don't measure, focusing on the important elements of APIs and adoptions and users is what will make the difference. And without getting too much into the technicalities, of course, a business is interested in the way it can scale and reuse applications that it is deploying, whether it be in different territories, different departments, or even within businesses that it's taking over. And so in terms of the metaphor for the modern business, one of the things I think is relevant and to take away is that organizations need to be absolutely digital first, which is an education process that everybody is going for, but they need to be obviously human-centric. And then finally, so sort of to wrap up about trying to get APIs into the boardroom in a way that they're understood is we have to focus, as I've spoken on, I'll just gloss over these, on agility. We leave deep technology speak, and some of the, even as I was listening to Chris earlier, there were certain words there that would send shivers down many boards that I've presented into because they would just gloss over. But we highlight the power of connections. That's very important within an organization. And again, going back to listening to Simon this morning, this ambidextrous organization he spoke about, that's something that we can start to address. And we want to encourage our businesses that we either are communicating with or employed by to be responsive to changes that are going on around us and adaptable. And then finally, it's sort of one last thought, and I'm just going to read this because it's, a business, going back to the previous slide, a business needs to be sort of digital where it matters and human where it counts. And APIs, to be fully understood to their value, we need to take a step back and actually reintroduce them as becoming more productized, more of an asset, more of an investment, albeit some of this is not applicable to every sector in the financial services because there's plenty of investment going in, but understood. And from that point, we will start to get the boardroom to really take note. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time for one question before the break. 90% of my consulting business from 2017 to 2020 was like explaining APIs to execs, right? So that was exactly that. So you're killing all my business there, but it's fine. We're glad to have you there. So one question. Yeah, we have a question there.
Thank you. Maybe this is the reverse of the issue, but how do you get the execs to actually open up and let people connect in as well? So it's the other side, stopping them feeling vulnerable and threatened and disintermediated and all the rest of it, rather than the positive that you're messaging.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I took something out of the slide, which was around, we don't want to embarrass anybody. Someone that comes into a boardroom and puts their Nokia 6210 down on the desk and starts to have a conversation. We have to manage that. But I think one hopes that any executive within any business there's always going to be a protectionism around. We have to be realistic about that. But they should want to do the best for the business at large. And I think, and this may be slightly altruistic, of course, is that we have to talk to the collective executive group about the fact that businesses must outlive them. And as a result of talking around outliving them, we have to accept that technology is going to come through and not replace people, because that's generally technology and people, and replacement is in my experience, one of the biggest challenges. It's about the enablement and the empowerment. And actually the same applies for the executive, is to talk to them about what comes next and what good looks like next for them or their business or their departments, as opposed to the threats that are coming behind. It's not a science, as I'm sure you know, but there is no doubt that we have to be cognizant of the fact that there's always anything we're less knowledgeable on, we're fearful of, and there's a whole different topic around change. Changes, technology change, APIs change is 60% about people. Technologies. So we have to deal with it in those proportions.
Yeah, one of the main quote I used to use talking to exec like where they should go there. So you can scare them, say if you don't do it, other will do, and they will embed and colonize our partner ecosystem, and they will take the spot we got. And now it will be just only sales connections. It will be also technical connections. So it will be really hard to get rid of them, right? But the thing is that when execs are interested about APIs, they want to monetize them, right? Sometimes they want direct money with it. And sometimes I quote I say don't think what are the best business model for your APIs, but what are the best APIs for your business models. Sometimes it's just making more of what you do exactly. You are a bank, you open accounts, you do mortgage, just do more of this, but with new channels, new partner ecosystem, embedding new products and everything. So you don't have always to use APIs to challenge everything, to say everything will change. It can be just doing the same thing, but at larger scale with new channels. So yeah, and like this, you got them by saying, oh, APIs can bring value and money to the company, but not because of APIs, but because they are part of the company strategy, and we used to have new channels. It will be just a new way to generate channels and value around. Yeah. Do you think the exec would relate to that idea?
Yeah. I mean, it was mentioned. I think it was. It's acknowledged, not necessarily understood, is that you have to, every organization has to be taking a step forward. So to look at the opportunity of where, what you're good at, doing more of what you're good at. And if APIs give you better scale, they give you opportunities to reach new markets, doing the same thing. And in terms of the capabilities, when an organization is making decisions around, I've got a capability that I know I do, can I service that through people, or can I service that through technology? That's going to make the difference, which going back to my point, will create the legacy of the business. So absolutely, I think they're there, but it's still, you cannot get away from the fact that technology and technologies coming through there's just, I think it's a generational thing. To be frank, I think it will change. I think in a board in 20 years' time will just be embracing technology because they just continually are asking questions of it. They're more curious folk, potentially, and certainly in many of the walks I treaded, in a sense, they're cautious is the default. So just not doing anything is better than trying to change. So to your point, long-winded answer to a short question is yes. I think when you get value